Welcome to the Atheist in Recovery podcast, where we talk about finding hope in recovery. And now your host, Dr. Adina Silvestri.
Hello guys, and welcome to episode 32 of the Atheists in Recovery podcast. And today we are talking about trauma in recovery, and trauma is defined as anything that you think is traumatic. There's no real one set definition. We talk a little bit about Pandora's box and when it is okay to open it up and how to do so safely. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, is they have all these feelings, they want to let them out, but they feel like catastrophe will happen if they do so. And so we talk a lot about that. And we also talk about the interplay between mind and body and how to control your thoughts, control, of course, being in parentheses. And so I hope you enjoy this episode. Under our guest, Nicole Burgess. Nicole is a licensed psychotherapist and leadership coach to introverted, sensitive, highly achieving professional women. She's also the host of Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast and the founder of Self-Care Summit. Improve your bottom line in your personal life. Over the last 15 years, she has coached, guided, and collaborated with over 1,000 women. She helps them demote their inner critic, embrace their fears through action, and grow professionally without sacrificing their personal life. As a result, they are more productive at work, have more meaningful relationships, and are no longer sacrificing their well-being for others. She is an INFJ. If you're curious as to what that means, it's a reference to the Myers-Briggs personality test, and an HSP, highly sensitive person, and a recovering perfectionist. Find out more about Nicole on her website at NicoleBurgessCoaching.com, and she's got some free meditations for us at NicoleBurgessCoaching.com/mindfulness. Okay, guys, here we go. Nicole Burgess, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Adina. I'm excited about our conversation today.
Me too. So I thought I'd start this conversation like I do most of the conversations by inquiring about your spiritual background from childhood.
I love this question. And I was telling you before we really started to record, I had to actually think about my journey because I think it's been a lot of twisting and turning. As a kid, I'm from the Midwest, and I grew up where, we went to church, and it was more the traditional type of setting. You attend church on Sundays, you did whatever activities. And I got really involved in church as a child. I loved it. I thought, for me, going to church, it was just the music was very moving for me. And I got to meet a lot of great people through there. The one thing I struggled with, though, is some of the messages were very exclusive in who was okay to be part of the Christian belief system and, who was not. And for me, I couldn't articulate it as a younger kid and even as a teenager, right? Because I got really involved in the different conferences and stuff that we had. And spirituality just moved me. And I knew that from a very young age. But it wasn't until I got older, I went into grad school, I learned about various different spiritual practices. And like, oh, now I understand how my core belief was more like the God, the higher power, spirit, universe, whatever term you use, was inclusive, came more from a place of love, and everybody was connected versus you're okay to come in, but you're not okay to come in. If you behave this way, sorry, I'm going to dismiss you, versus tell me more about who you are and what's going on. And I know when I got involved as a teen, when I got involved in some of the conferences, my parents, because I got so excited about things, it's almost as if, and I understand it more now as an adult than as a teenager, my overzealousness was too much for them. And so then I was like, oh, wait, I'm getting this message, like I need to tamper that excitement back, that it's not okay to really have conversations with God, to be able to pray how I want to pray, to wear what I want to wear when I go to church, right? It's like you have to behave in a certain way, look a certain way. And I struggled with that. So it's fascinating growing up, all the subtle messages I received and knowing it wasn't sitting well with me. But it wasn't until I got more into grad school and the differences and yet the similarities to me, most of the spiritual practices bring, that I could articulate that, oh, this is what I believe in. And I'm open to hearing what my clients believe in, because I think spirituality is part of who we are.
Yeah. Talk a little bit more about that. How do you incorporate spirituality into your relationships, whether it be client or family or, yeah.
I think for me, I allow it to be more organic. With clients, I get more inquisitive, like, what helps them feel connected? What helps them stay grounded? So whether that is, their Catholic upbringing, whether that is a Buddhist way of viewing things, whether that is Hindu, whether it's whatever, right? And to me, I'm like, oh, then let's go more into this, like what really works for you. Because what often I see in my clients is it wasn't okay to believe a certain way. It wasn't okay to really incorporate that in. And so what happens is, you and I know as therapists, when we disown a part of ourselves, there's a fracturing, right? Or kind of a disconnection with the whole being. And part of my work with clients, especially when there's a trauma background from abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, financial, whatever it may be, it's really reintegrating everybody and what all that helps them.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Since you mentioned trauma, let's spend some time there for a minute. I feel like when people hear the word trauma, they think of the big traumas, Can you talk a little bit about some of the smaller traumas and what that may look like? Because let me also preface by, I think that I don't know of anyone that survived childhood without a trauma.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
I totally agree. Yeah. So for me, because I don't have like this true technical research saying this was what a big trauma is, this is a little trauma. For me, the little traumas are when parents aren't necessarily emotionally attuned to their children. And if you're like a highly sensitive person, there's a lot of misattunement, which I know some people will call that the emotional neglect, because your emotions are dismissed. You're not really seen or heard. You're either too sensitive or you're too this or you're too that. And that can cause trauma because you don't feel safe, seen, heard, held. You can be in a car accident once, right? And I don't consider that necessarily a big trauma. Some people may, but you may be able to just move right through that with no issue, right? Sometimes I also think, though, when we have a lot of little traumas, they can add up to a big trauma.
Yeah.
Because it's a repetition of different things occurring in your life. And if you don't have a space to be able to process it or to understand what happened, it can lead into other issues later on. Have your spirituality, be able to, whether it's pray, journal, meditate, whatever that is for you, to whoever it is you talk to. When you incorporate that, that's one way of processing it. And then we also know there's therapy and coaching and all of that too that can help with that, mostly therapy when it was processing trauma. But it's knowing that you're truly okay. Whatever has happened to you, it happened, and that it doesn't need to define you. And I think when we disconnect from our spirituality, then all of a sudden we can get stuck in, oh, this is who I am. And I don't have necessarily a different frame of reference anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Tell me a little bit more about how self-reflection can improve one's relationship and sort of heal those old wounds. And I'm asking about that because I feel like we can have things that are going on. A lot of my listeners are self-medicate in the past with drugs or alcohol or food. And so they could have these traumas go on, then they become sober or they're in recovery, but they're not ready to open up that Pandora's box.
Yeah. And I know for many of my clients, right, that when we talk about different substances or whatever it is you use to necessarily numb things out, it's a coping mechanism. Because the thought is, what my clients will tell me, that if I really allow myself to feel the sadness, the hurt, the anger, whatever, that is going to be so big, Nicole, it's going to just trample me.
Yeah, take me down.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, what an incredible insight. And helping them understand that's nothing more than a fear thought, that our emotions are just that, emotions. They're not good or bad. We ride the wave of them. But if we don't allow ourselves to feel all those emotions, you also are unable to allow in joy and happiness. And that's part of recovery. And so to me, if you're so worried about opening up that Pandora's box, I'd say set a timer. And I know I do this a lot with clients who struggle with sadness. I'm like, give yourself a 15-minute timer. Then I want you to put on the saddest music. I want you to get out photos that make you really sad. Just allow yourself to feel it for 15 minutes. And if you need to do it 5, whatever your time frame needs to be. And then after that timer goes off, get up and do something totally different, because it's all part of going into the pain and coming out, going into the pain, coming out, so that eventually you move through that. And again, if we bring that back to the spirituality, it's being able to say, if sitting is too much, if writing is too much, it's like, get up and move, be out in nature. To me, being out in nature is as if I'm communicating with God, right? And if I'm struggling with something, I get to say, oh my gosh, this is so hard. I don't like it. This is difficult to be in. But I get to share it in a space that I feel really grounded and just name what it is I'm feeling. It's not good or bad, but I can also release it in that moment.
Yeah.
Because you and I know the more we stuff those emotions down, it's going to come back oftentimes through the body, whether, you've got headaches more often, stomach aches more often, you're sick more often.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to make them go away and you can't.
I too feel like some individuals, at least some of the clients that I know of, will say, if I take this armor off, I will die.
I've not ever had anybody, I like to say with some of my clients, and I bring in a lot of humor into the work that I do. And I'm like, I have not ever had anybody become a puddle of tears on my floor, ever. I've not ever seen anybody in all the years I've been doing this, right? I've been doing it now for over 15 years, ever die from stating that they feel scared, nervous, angry, happy, sad, whatever the emotion is. Emotion is not who you are. It's something that you're experiencing.
Right. And it's going to come out no matter what. So whether you deal with it head on or not, my experience is that it will come out.
And it also goes back to, what's the story you're telling yourself about it? So like, for example, that comment, if I actually share this, whatever this emotion is, I will die from it. It's like, wow, that's a powerful, and it's an extreme story.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So then I'd go back and say, tell me another time where you allowed yourself to really feel, just a happy moment, just one moment in your life. Tell me about that. And did you die from that feeling, emotion? And tell me one moment that you felt sad. Tell me one moment you allowed yourself to really feel frustrated. Did you or anybody else die from you feeling that? And when you start to just normalize, like, oh yeah, I do. We all have emotions throughout the day. There's not one consistent emotion throughout the day. I think that's another kind of illusion sometimes people have. It's like, I got to feel happy all day long. It's like, now that's a total illusion. It's not going to happen. But you're not going to feel angry all day long either, unless you choose to.
Yeah. I was listening to my friend, Brene Brown. I tend to gobble up anything and everything that she puts out there. And she talked about curiosity as being your superpower.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Well, to go back to self-reflection, self-reflection is about getting curious. If we do not allow ourselves to have some quiet space, you're unable to really observe your thoughts, observe the stories you have going on inside of your mind. And instead of getting attached to those thoughts, curiosity really is like you become the observer of them. You watch them go by. I often tell clients, you can imagine either being like the thoughts get to be the cloud in the sky and they pass by. I personally love the image of my thoughts are like a leaf going down a river, and I get to choose which leaf I want to pick out, hold on to, and maybe I want to pick out 12 of them. Oh, I need to hold those all really close to my heart right now and go, I need to be afraid of this or worry about this, because that's my typical go-to, right? If my perfectionism gets kicked up. And being able to say, wait, I can also put those leaves back down, which are those thoughts, because that's all they are thoughts. Just because we have a thought doesn't mean it's true.
I like the leaf.
To me, it's more tangible, and I'm really in nature that way. I'm that tactile person.
Yeah. I like that a lot. Yeah. Curiosity is, I think it's huge. It takes all of the meaning out of the story, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was going to say, and what we tell ourselves over and over and over, right? Like I like to share with my clients, if I have one thought, and let's say the thought is, oh my gosh, this emotion is going to be the death of me. That's one sentence. And now all of a sudden, another thought's going to be like, okay, I've got to find some evidence that proves that's true. You remember when so-and-so did X, Y, and Z, and then you felt this way, and it was just like the worst thing ever, and you felt so embarrassed, you just thought you were going to die. Now I've got another sentence. All of a sudden, I've created like a paragraph, then my thoughts are going to start to create a page, then I've got a chapter of a book, and then all of a sudden, I've written everything that either has happened or is going to happen future-based, and I'm stuck in the story versus curiosity is like, wow, look at that fear go. That gremlin just wants to just crap all over my day. And all I'm doing is sitting here.
I like the imagery of the gremlin.
But that's where the curiosity comes into place. Because when we allow ourselves to just get curious for a few minutes of a day, sort of mindfulness is, right? That self-reflection is, it's like, what part is still true for me and what part is ready to be let go?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love mindfulness. As clients know, I talk about it pretty often. And the listeners are probably going to be having a lot more shows on mindfulness. So be aware. Yeah. So what are some practices that you find helpful in being more curious? Like for the individuals, maybe that feel like opening up Pandora's box, like we said earlier, is just going to be too much.
So one thing that I do, I truly meditate almost every single day. I've been in this practice for years now. Mm-hmm. And part of that, when I meditate, I can clear my mind, observe the thoughts. And if I've got some thought that just wants to sit there and circle, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Then I know it's time to also get out the paper. Because what it tells me is my mind really wants me to capture this thought. I call it the hamster in the wheel thought, right? We can ruminate on it, which is unhelpful. But as soon as I put that down on paper, I also know I can close that book. If I choose to go back and reread it, I absolutely can. But we know from also research, kinesthetically, when we write things down, there's a connection between our body, right, and our mind. But what our brain will do is like, oh, thank you. I don't have to repeat this 5,000 times for you because I thought you were going to forget it. You now get to see it.
Interesting.
Yeah. And sometimes when we actually put it out on paper, I can literally take that notebook, stand up, put it away from me by a couple feet, and I now have a true new perspective. I can walk around that thought to the other side and go, what does it look like from this side? What does it look like from another side, from a different dimension, different perspective? Sometimes what we really need to do is get some space between what we've been thinking or the stories we've been told or the stories we tell ourselves and get a new perspective from a different vantage point. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing I do. Another thing truly for me as a highly sensitive person is also being out in nature.
Nicole, can you tell us what a definition of a highly sensitive person is?
Yeah. So a highly sensitive person, Dr. Elaine Aron really has been doing research on these traits since the 90s. Mm-hmm. And I actually didn't even find out about this until about 3 years ago from another colleague. So she has an acronym. It's called DOES. It's the depth of processing. It means you do a lot of reflecting, you do a lot of deep feeling, you've got a lot of empathy for others. And HSPs are about 20% of the population.
And HSPs are?
The highly sensitive person. It's also called the sensory sensitivity person. And again, it's a small population. So that's where I think a lot of the misattunement happens with families and people. And so there's the D, which is the depth of processing. O is overarousability, meaning you're easily overstimulated or overaroused. You can either get too bored or too overstimulated, and you're really trying to find what that optimal level is for you. If you get overstimulated, you'll shut down, get overwhelmed, get stuck, all that sort of fun stuff that I see often with my clients. E is the emotional intensity, which is you can be kind of responsive, reactive, and you're really strong to both positive and so-called negative affects. Whereas non-sensitive folks, you can give them in the same situation and their emotional kind of responses are not as strong. So you can be easily moved to tears from a TV commercial, music. That's why I got into the spirituality in the way I did, because music really moved me, just felt it to my core. For some people, it's like, yeah, not so much. We have more mirror neurons in our brain. So again, there's where the empathy part of it is. S is the sensory sensitivity. And you can get easily overstimulated again because the sensitivity or the stimulation, again, can be from the lights, sounds, smells, and that can overstimulate your whole system and can feel like, oh my gosh, I can't breathe. I need to get out of this. For many of my clients, for me, it's lights. And so for my clients, I've got some people that strong smells of perfume really give them headaches. Others of them, it's sound can just like grate on their nerves. And then that's it. That's the does. So the depth, over-arousability, emotional sensitivity, and then the sensory sensitivity. And so for me, being out in nature, being a highly sensitive person, I feel very connected to, again, my definition of God and grounded at the same time. So it's a both and. When I'm grounded, I also feel like I am part of everything, like the universe. We're all connected. So as a highly sensitive person, it does go where we're very much about, inclusivity, which I know many people that you work with too, there's a lot of that too. But it's also nature's a big thing and it just calms the nervous system down. And so for me, I often will tell my clients, because again, a big portion of them are HSPs, to find moments to either, if they can't get out into nature, get a nature picture, look out the window, take a moment just to breathe in, listen to soundscapes of nature, whatever it is that works for them. But that helps them kind of, oh yeah, I'm okay. I'm safe. Nothing's wrong, right? But my brain got overactive and made something wrong.
Right. Which will happen when you have trauma.
Yep.
So as we sort of get close to wrapping up, I thought I would share a quote with you and get your interpretation on it. It's a Jungian quote. Yeah, I know. As the therapists geek out. Okay. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
Absolutely. I've used that quote many a times as well. I wholly believe that. Again, that's where self-reflection comes in. That's where curiosity comes in. That's where exploring your belief system that you have, challenging it. What we were taught as children doesn't necessarily mean it was true, or maybe it fit then, but as you're now an adult, it no longer does. It's okay to challenge that. It goes back to I also go back to what are your values? Sometimes parents, try to quote, force their values onto their children. It's like, well, that's your value. It doesn't mean it's going to be your kid's value.
Right.
So when you can pause, get curious, explore a lot, observe versus judge what you think and believe, you start to bring those to the consciousness. Then you get to choose, do I want to hold on to that? Or is it time to, forgive, have self-compassion and release?
Right. The script, the story is no longer serving me. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, again, to go back to what you talked about with some of your clients, that fear of if I open that Pandora's box, it's so afraid of well, who am I going to become? It's well, you are already who you are, but you've got that armor is not allowing your full you coming out. We get the mask of you, what you should be or what you think you ought to be or how you should be behaving, right? Which again, when it's trauma-based, the fear of, but oh my gosh, I'm going to get hurt again. It's well, you may emotionally feel hurt, but not necessarily a absolute guarantee you're going to be physically or emotionally hurt to such a level that you have been in the past.
Yeah.
Just because it happened in the past does not mean it's going to happen again in the future.
Right. So living in that sort of may or may not field. I couldn't think of the right word, but yeah.
Yeah. Coming back to the present, because it's the only thing you ever have is the present moment. Past is done. Future isn't here yet. This is where you are.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to stop. How can people best find you and some of the awesome work that you're doing?
So they can head over to my coaching website, which is NicoleBurgessCoaching.com. And they can also go out to NicoleBurgessCoaching.com/mindfulness. And there's a page I have out there that has some meditations on it. Right now, it's just me talking, but I've now found out I can put some music to that, and I haven't done that yet. But if they want the meditations that I have out there, one of them is the loving kindness meditation, which I think is huge.
Love that.
For folks, who are very self-critical, grew up in self-critical homes, or there's trauma-based stuff, because that's going to allow you to start to have more joy and love in your life versus letting fear drive it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a huge proponent in, again, a lot of the work that I do is replacing the fear with love. And it's not all the woo-woo-y stuff too. There's grounded techniques in this, and that's loving kindness meditation is a big one for that. But it's like the more you have love in that space in your life, fear really can't run everything.
Yeah. So I will definitely link to that in the show notes. And I love loving kindness meditation. I use it often. So
Yes, it's powerful.
It is. It is. Well, thanks again so much for being on.
Well, thank you so much for having me on and for what you are doing in our world as well.
Thank you again. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Atheists in Recovery podcast. For more great info and to stay up to date, head over to atheistsandrecovery.com.